let me start this off by sharing with you guys a moment that is both tedious and annoying for a film critic. Imagine that he is just doing his job, looking at a movie, talk about what works and what doesn't, and give it a rating that he feels like it's appropriate for that film. Then suddenly, there is that one moron in the comments that says,
well, if you said that about a movie, then how come it has this much % on Rotten Tomatoes?
Whenever a critic would get asked that question, there was only one thing that is in his mind. Can I please smack you? In the world of moviegoers, film critics, or just movies and TV shows in general, the website Rotten Tomatoes has always been a subject of controversy. There has already been plenty of articles done that discuss about the accuracy of the website and how it affects the performance of a feature film. However, even if it is one of the biggest websites about movies and TV shows next to IMDb, does it necessarily mean that it's a trustworthy website? Like, can you always count on it to know what movies are good or bad? If you already have the answer in your head, then let me ask you this. Is Rotten Tomatoes a bad website? Well, let's find out. Now, before we determine if it is a good or bad website, we must first know what the website is in general. The main function of the site is to take many reviews from all different kinds of critics and give it to a specific movie or a TV show a general rating. Like, take all their ratings that they gave to the subject, and through some math, you would get what should be the ultimate average rating. However, unlike other websites that do this like Metacritic's, Rotten Tomatoes simplify their ratings down to the point of just asking if a critic said it's either good or bad. If a critic gives something like either a 6 out of 10, 3 out of 5 stars, 2.5 out of 4 stars, C- or whatever, their rating would be considered fresh. Anything lower than that would count as a rotten score. As for the percentage, it is an algorithm of how many fresh ratings the subject got in contrast to how many rotten ratings it received, depending on how many reviews it got in general, thus creating what we know today as the famous tomato meter. And as a bonus, if the subject got about 75% or more fresh reviews, it would receive the website's own seal of approval known as being certified fresh, complete with its own trophy for the filmmakers. Of course, the website delivers so much more than that, like news, trailers, podcasts, interviews, the list goes on. But what the website is known for the most is its rating system. With all that said, here's where the system can get some problems. Now, let's say that there are two movies that people gave either a 5 out of 10 or a 6 out of 10. I think we can all agree that both ratings are kind of the same. Like, it says that it's kind of decent. Like, it ain't that good, but it's not bad either. However, for Rotten Tomatoes, those two ratings make a world of a difference. Let's say that there are 10 critics and 9 of them gave the movie a rating of 6 out of 10, while the other gave it a 5. According to the tomato meter, that movie would be 90% fresh. However, let's take those same critics and they review another movie. This time, 8 of them would give it a 5 out of 10, and the other 2 would give it a 6 out of 10. This would give the film a tomato meter score of 20%, which is considered rotten. As a result, if audiences do what the site says, they would rather go see a movie that has 90% than the one that has 20%, expecting one to be fantastic while the other one being a piece of crap. But in actuality, those two films are pretty much the same. This is not even mentioning how almost all the movies that got either 100% or 0% are just the obscure ones that only got like what, 5, 6, 7 people who gave it a review? Trust me, nobody makes a big deal about them. So you get the idea about its rating system. It's an algorithm to simply determine what critics think is good or bad, nothing more. But here's where things get confusing and annoying. If you look at the placement of how they put up their numbers, you'll see that the tomato meter score, along with the fresh and rotten icon and the bar that shows how filled up it is according to the percentage, is the big eye catcher. Sure, there are other things featured here like the critics' consensus, how many reviews it collected, how many of them are fresh or rotten, and the actual average rating, but the text is so small, they might as well be little scribbles. Because of how it is placed, people assume that the big percentage they see is what determines how good or bad a movie is. This is often why you'll see so many people believing that the website would either be overpraising or overslamming a film. In fact, if you compare the percentage and the average score almost every time, you'll find that they're completely different numbers that could possibly change your perspective on the film. If you don't believe me, allow me to bring up 2 examples: How to Train Your Dragon and Zootopia. On the site, they both have an amazing rating of 98% on the tomato meter. I mean, if they're so close to 100%, they must be amazing, right? Even to this day, they're considered some of the best animated features of the decade. Now, let's put a twist to this. If you look at the average rating under the big percentage, you'll find that both of them have about 8 out of 10. That's a really good score, and it still indicates that they are worth watching. But it makes a huge difference if a movie is either labeled as a pretty good film with a few small issues, or just one step away from being perfect. In a way, movies need this exaggeration as a way of marketing for people to say how amazing or how terrible it is. But even if people do this to talk about the movie, that doesn't mean it's a good thing. When people would mention a movie's Rotten Tomatoes score, it's very often used as an argument to why a movie is good or bad. It is even more aggravating to see it used as a counter-argument to someone else's thoughts on the film. I understand about the use of statistics to improve and make your argument strong, showing that you have done your research to defend your case, but this is just arguing about liking a movie or not. It's completely subjective. One person's point of view about a movie can be completely different from another, and that's completely fine. This will not hurt people whatsoever, unless you attack people in places like the comment section because you're so full of rage just for a disagreement. We all know that making a movie based on statistics that goes into what modern kids thinks is cool and hip is absolutely stupid, so what makes it different when some people will use statistics to say how good or bad a movie is? Do you have any idea how dumb they look when they think they can debunk whatever a film critic like me say about a film with a freaking number? Whenever they do that, all I hear is,
well, the chart says...
I'm not asking the charts, I'm asking you!
Well, the chart says...
You are everything that's wrong with entertainment!
It's even worse when they do it on an old movie that was released before Rotten Tomatoes was made. Sure, a movie like The Shining has good praise on the site, but back when it was released, the critics slammed it as an absolute piece of crap. No joke. And here is something very important that people seem to forget. Nobody agrees on everything that the critics say 100%. They're all equally human as much as you are. And sure, you'll find some things to agree upon, but it also happens when you have some differences with them. And that's perfectly fine because literally everyone's like that. Even critics don't agree with each other. It happens to everyone when the critics would praise a movie that you know for a fact that it's bad, or would bash a movie that you know for a fact that it's good, and you're just sitting in the middle like,
why is everyone so f***ing stupid? Why aren't more people intelligent, like me?
I know this may seem like an egotistical thing to say, but trust me, deep down, everybody does this. You can't look at me and say that you've never felt like that once. What is different with each person, however, is how they handle it with something called maturity and respect for others. The more they react and make spiteful comments about a different opinion or a point of view, the less they have. I've even seen people brainwashed to what critics say, but the moment they say something that the person disagrees on, oh boy, suddenly the critics are the arch nemesis and they must be destroyed. But then again, this is just regarding about stuff in pop culture like movies. When it comes to problems that can really affect the world like politics or social issues, then that is another discussion for another day. But going back into what I was talking about, if you really want the best way to know if a movie is actually good or not, all you have to do is go see it yourself. You'll never know how a movie actually is unless you take the time to look at it and see how you feel. You won't fully understand it just by word of mouth alone. You have to go through it firsthand. And who knows, maybe your experience will be unique from others, whether they be good or bad. But with what I'm saying with all this, does this mean that the role of a critic is useless? Of course not. The whole point of a critic can be narrowed down to two options. One, if you haven't tried what he's talking about, then his job is to strongly recommend for you to either try it or to avoid it. Two, if you have already tried it, then his job is to be a second opinion to see if you share similar feelings or open up to a new point of view. But one thing that doesn't change about the two is that this is coming from someone who not only has a good knowledge, but also has a passion and a love for what he's talking about. Even I look to other critics to have a second opinion on a movie that I just saw. So back into the subject of Rotten Tomatoes, is it actually a bad website? Honestly, Absolutely not. The site is meant to be this big movie website, on top of delivering a signature rating system, and it does its job very well. In fact, every Friday, I'm always excited to check out the weekly catch-up just to update myself on some movie news. The reason why it's annoying when people bring it up is because they're using the site for their own personal agenda, hoping that they can win some dumb argument that doesn't exist. So it's not the website that's the problem, it's the people that use it. It's like a lot of those highly acclaimed TV shows or games where some people refuse to support it, not because of the show or game itself, but because of the fans. So now that we have found the source of the problem, there is only one question that remains. Why do they do this? Well, the answer may surprise you. You have no idea how dependent some people are to critics. They don't want to admit it, but they can't hide from the truth. In today's modern society with the internet, patience is starting to become an endangered species, to the point that when it comes to information, people don't want it now. They want it yesterday, especially when it comes to pop culture and when people get into the hype. They beg to know every little thing about the project the moment when it's first announced. This would eventually lead to conspiracies, theories, rumors, and so much more that people would buy into anything and blow it out of proportions. Ironically, people demand to have spoilers without getting, well, actual spoilers, if you know what I mean. This is where the critics come in. Whenever there's a movie that people are interested in, they immediately want to know either how good or how bad the movie is. And what other site would they go to other than the one that embodies telling you if a movie is good or bad? Rotten Tomatoes. In fact, here's a perfect example of what I mean. Now, let's take a look at Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. During the days before its release, Rotten Tomatoes was probably having the most successful day in terms of people coming into their site on a regular basis. People were keeping such a watchful eye on that tomato meter to determine how bad could it possibly be. As it keeps going down, the comparisons were popping up like, it's officially worse than Star Wars Episode 1, it's officially worse than Twilight, it's officially worse than The Room. And the biggest irony of them all with the website is that nobody even bothers looking into the specifics. Nobody would have the patience to look into each review submitted to the site asking why they got that rating. All they care about is that big percentage that they believe that's all they need to determine if a film is either good or bad. I remember some people so desperate to know the rating of a movie that they would go onto social media on an hourly basis just to update on all the ratings the movie is getting.
Okay, so on Rotten Tomatoes, it now has 45%, which is a point lower than yesterday, 6.7 on IMDb, which dropped 0.2 points than before, and on Metacritic it got 52, which it hasn't changed from last time. Things are looking pretty bad for the movie, but at this point, should I still go watch it?
I guess if there's one thing you should take from this, is just use Rotten Tomatoes responsibly. Treat it like you would any other film critic, and you should be fine. Either take their recommendation or listen to the second opinion from an individual or an entire group, and from there, you could determine if a movie is worth watching thanks to the help of the critics. Trust me, I am 99% sure on this. So much so that it's certified fresh.
I don't like tomatoes and I don't think they like me. I wouldn't say I hate them and they're not my enemy. We do our best to coexist by staying far apart. I don't like tomatoes, they always make me far too unhappy. Now you might like tomatoes and that's okay with me, but please don't put one on my plate or splat one on my meat. Spaghetti sauce, tomato soup I love with all my heart, but I don't like tomatoes, they always make me far too unhappy. Maybe you thought there'd be a
I hope to be able to live the rest of my life without ever having to make that choice.